Thank you again for joining me. To begin, I would like to bridge the theme of my panel, Links, Seeds, and Violence, with my personal work. As a reminder, that work begins with a story of arson. You may also notice that my work is centered on snowshoe hare, not necessarily lynx, which I'll discuss as well. In the fall of 1998, a long-planned expansion project at Vail was approved by the Forest Service. To create more ski runs, the resort intended to clear more than 800 acres of old-growth forest in elk and Canada lynx habitat. Days before that project began, however, arson was carried out across the resort. A loosely formed group called the Earth Liberation Front took credit for the action, stating that they carried it out, quote, on behalf of the lynx. In an interview, a former member of ELF who participated in the arson to some degree spoke about Vail Resorts as a victim and ended with the statement, quote, at the end of that process, perhaps deciding that the most compassionate thing in the world is to light their buildings on fire, speaking about the resort. I include this quote not to imply that I have done anything so extreme, but to highlight the intense dedication some feel towards conserving imperiled species and their habitats. This passion is certainly held by those acting within government and other institutions as well. Indeed, the Canada lynx is only found in Colorado at its current numbers due to intensive reintroduction efforts carried out in the late 90s and early 2000s, overlapping with the Vail Resorts arson. These and other values led me to become interested in this work myself, but how does that relate to snowshoe hare? Canada lynx are dependent on these hares as their primary food source. Lynx are usually associated with certain forest structural variables, notably dense vegetation cover and old-growth spruce fir forest, which is why activists and researchers alike are concerned with how recreational development could impact the species' survival and reproduction. However, as a specialist species, determining whether an area could support Canada lynx is primarily based on population estimates of snowshoe hare. Therefore, I sought to examine both snowshoe hare density and habitat quality within my study area. I sampled at 2 sites. The first was within the boundaries of Crested Butte Mountain Resort's special use permit with the U.S. Forest Service in an area known as Teal Park or drainage. Here, the result was conditionally approved to expand their permit by over 400 acres and add new infrastructure to the area, including developed terrain and 2 new ski lifts. I also sampled at a second site in the Gothic Research Natural Area. As a research area, this site cannot be developed. It is also at a higher elevation and dominated by old-growth spruce fir forest, i.e., classic Canada lynx habitat, so it was helpful to include for comparison. As in a pilot study, I counted snowshoe hare pellets at dozens of pre-established plots. This is a non-invasive method commonly used by natural resource management agencies to estimate snowshoe hare population density. I took a 1-meter-long string, rotated it around a rebar stake to create a circular plot, and counted all intact pellets inside. Fortunately, it's quite easy to recognize snowshoe hare pellets. Although this image shows a cottontail rather than a snowshoe hare, it does give a surprisingly helpful reference as to what I was counting at each of my plots. Fecal pellet plots were carried out in 2016 as part of a pilot study, and I resampled a subset of these plots, but also wanted to include a simple assessment of snowshoe hare in Canada lynx habitat. I did so by estimating dense horizontal cover, an important component of winter hare habitat explaining their presence and abundance, using a cover board. A volunteer would hold the board, shown here. I would take a picture from 5 meters away and repeat this process for all 4 cardinal directions. Later, I estimated the percentage of the board covered by vegetation. This method serves as an assessment of winter hare habitat, but along with fecal pellet counts, is designed to be carried out in the snow-off period. Although these 2 methods are quite simple, they can take a great deal of time, particularly in study sites like mine where plots are located far from trails on steep, difficult terrain. For agencies that cannot afford to have multiple technicians spending a large part of the summer field season sampling, this can mean that such data is valued but not feasible to collect. Another goal of mine, then, was to determine whether open access, remotely sensed data could be used as a replacement or supplement to these traditional resource-intensive field techniques. My research goals and questions can be summarized here. First, do my study sites have an adequate population density of snowshoe hares to support Canada lynx? Second, what geospatial variables are important for predicting snowshoe hare density in these study areas? And finally, my ultimate goal, which I wasn't sure whether was feasible, was to model snowshoe hare habitat and extrapolate those results across a larger area. I wanted to see whether I could achieve that goal through the data available to me, types of data that agencies would similarly be able to access, and if so, whether it was useful for natural resource managers, especially for the Forest Service's forest planning process. Keeping those goals in mind, I'll move into my results. Canada lynx are said to be supported in areas containing at least 0.5 hares per hectare, which based on the formula derived from my study area is approximately 6 pellets. Unfortunately, in neither site nor year did pellet counts reach this threshold. As I expected, there were more pellets at the Gothic RNA site, which had more classic hare and lynx habitat. Interestingly, I counted a lower average number of pellets in my 2020 study at both sites as compared to the 2016 pilot study. Regardless, there are certainly hares on the landscape, and research by Ivan et al. Has provided evidence that Canada lynx can be supported in areas with lower than peak snowshoe hare density. I therefore moved forward with my attempts to create models with snowshoe hare fecal pellets, a proxy for population density, as the dependent variable. In terms of understanding what environmental qualities explain pellet numbers, I thought of variables as belonging to different categories: my field data, or dense horizontal cover, vegetation and topographic variables derived from open access databases, and models of vegetation cover derived from remote sensing products. While becoming more common, products like LiDAR imagery are still expensive, so I hope to see whether imagery that had been collected for more general purposes but made open access would be useful in my models. I won't delve too far into my models, but what I would like to highlight here is that interestingly, this model and other top candidate models showed that pellet numbers were lower where spruce fir percentage was higher, contrary to my expectations. I have a variety of possible explanations, one of which being that the vegetation data I acquired through a Forest Service database were at scales significantly larger than my study area, which becomes apparent when you look at a map. This figure shows the number of fecal pellets I counted at each plot during my 2020 field season. What I hope you can start to see here is that pellet numbers were higher in the Gothic RNA, shown on the left, as compared to the ski resort expansion area. What I also hope you can see, something that I've touched upon a number of times, is that the scale at which vegetation data were summarized was quite large in comparison to the sizes of my study grids and overall study areas. This, again, may help explain why the relationship between pellet counts and proportion spruce fir forest was the opposite of what I expected. It also shows to me that an approach solely incorporating the variables I identified may not be suitable for extrapolating a model of snowshoe hare population density across my study area. I do, however, still believe that such data is useful, particularly if summarized on a more meaningful scale and in concert with other forms of data, including canopy height models derived from remotely sensed imagery. Agencies, including the U.S. Forest Service, are compelled to manage for imperiled species like the Canada lynx alongside their prey and their habitat, but are also operating under a multi-use mission. That means that alongside wildlife, they must manage forests for a variety of values ranging from winter recreation to logging to cultural values and traditional uses. I hope that through finding an intersection between wildlife research and management, one that also relied a great deal on geospatial analysis, I have produced results and interpretations which will aid in the continued monitoring and managing for snowshoe hare and Canada lynx in the Gunnison National Forest and beyond. I hope to explore a few different directions branching off my research, which I can discuss during the question and answer period, but want to briefly acknowledge those who supported this work. I thank my advisor, Dr. Jessica Young, along with my committee members Matthew Vasquez of the U.S. Forest Service and Dr. Ian Breckheimer of the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory. I could not have completed my thesis without all their assistance and support, and acknowledge them in their institutions. I would also like to thank all the volunteers who helped me in the field, particularly Seneca Woolman, who helped me for my entire summer season. At this point, I would like to answer any questions.